Hello, and welcome to What We've Learnt. It's me, Steve Kemish, and it's Shane Redding, as ever. Hello, Shane.
Hello, Steve. How are you this week?
Well, I'm very well, thank you very much. Very well, and quite excited. I'm often in awe of our guest, having known her not quite as long as you, as I'm sure we'll talk about, but many a year. Julia Porter, who always inspires and makes me feel, dare I say it, slightly inadequate in terms of what she's achieved. A fascinating person. Tell us more, Shane.
Absolutely.
Who have we got?
Yeah, really pleased that Julia Porter's joining us. She's currently a partner in the Data Protection Network Associates, which is a consultancy and thought leadership business focusing on data and governance. And really interesting to hear from her about her, if you like, current role, how she's ended up in a portfolio career when perhaps that wasn't where she thought she might end up when she started out.
Yeah, I'm sure we're going to learn an awful lot from her, and I'm sure she's got an awful lot of value to say. So rather than us hold on too long, Shane, shall we bring her in?
Yes, let's. So, hi, Julia. It's great to have you with us, and looking forward to learning what you've learned.
Hi Shane, thank you very much for inviting me. Yes, plenty has been going on in lockdown. In fact, we have set up a whole new business, which has been good fun and interesting when you haven't met your new colleagues for more than 6 months now. Actually, I haven't seen them since March. So we have got very adept at working online, using Slack, using Zoom calls, like lots of other people have as well. And getting ourselves organised, ready for when the lockdown is lifted and when we get back to normal commercial activities.
Which instantly makes me feel entirely inadequate, Julia, because all I've managed to do is decorate a couple of bedrooms whilst lockdown. You've started a whole business, which is to be applauded, even if you've not met them. So tell us about that. What have you been up to? What's the business focused on?
So it's a data protection and privacy consultancy called the Data Protection Network. It was born out of the old Op4 company, which sadly went into administration early part of this year. So we were able to acquire the Data Protection Network website. And since then, we have rebranded, we have introduced a lot of new content, started launching webinars, produced some guidance, and started looking for business. So it's been an interesting time when you pretty much start from scratch, but equally as a partnership, you've got interesting challenges around making sure that you work with each other in a collaborative way. There isn't one person in charge, so that's presented a few challenges sometimes, but I think we all feel that we're an interesting mix. We're all very different, but in combination, it's a strong proposition.
So that's interesting you say about, your different skills and interesting mix, and just talk a little bit more about what you think the skills are that you need in a consultancy and thought leadership business that's focused around data protection and governance. What are those skills?
Well, I mean, you've got skills around the consultancy itself, so you need the subject matter experts. So if you look at us, we are all subject matter experts, but in slightly different places. So my area of interest is advertising and digital marketing in particular, although I can do all the other stuff, but that's what I'm particularly interested in. My two colleagues have interests in other areas. So the subject matter expert piece means that we can support each other. But then there's other sides of the business around just simple things like getting the finances up and running, making sure that we get our email campaigns sorted out properly, that we, do the website correctly. And one of our team is, an editorial person, so that's been really helpful. I've been looking after the finances. So actually what we've been able to do is divvy up all the work and not overlap too much. And I think that makes a huge difference, because in a small business, there's always a danger of everyone trying to do everything. And what we are trying to do is not do everything and really make sure that we're allocating the jobs that we're all best equipped to do. I mean, it's a constant challenge because, you're keen to get on with it, but small businesses often struggle with everyone trying to do everything, and then it turns into a big muddle. So that's the bit that we're trying to avoid.
Or everyone trying to do everything and not focusing on the tasks that are most important to get the business kind of lifting and going, I suppose. You've got to gain customers and keep customers rather than just have an incredibly slick process, but no one billing I guess.
Well, absolutely, Steve. I mean, one of the interesting things, out of the three of us, I would say I'm probably the most sales focused one. I actually started my career in a sales job, and so if there's any kind of selling that needs doing or pitching, then certainly I often end up being the lead person on that. So I think it's recognizing how we need to get to the place we need to get to, and the other thing is making sure that we actually follow through and use the things we've invested in properly. So for instance, we decided to invest in using a webinar tool. So actually, if we've invested in the platform, and we did our first webinar ourselves with Privacy Question Time a couple of weeks ago, then we now need to kind of have a program of webinars every month, at least one a month, and make full use of the things that we've invested in. The danger is they're like sort of, baubles, as you kind of pick up a bauble and think, oh, that's nice, but actually you've got to kind of follow through, and I think the follow through is really important.
I think that's really interesting, because I think that there are many businesses that don't do that very well, whether they're small or large. And I think across your career, you've worked in very different size organisations, and it's really interesting to hear you started in sales. So perhaps, when you started out, tell us a little bit about your first job and what that was. Presumably you had no idea that you were going to be ending up running a consulting advisory business around governance. That's not where you started, was it?
No. And I think that's a reflection, I guess, of my, there's an element of me which is a little bit restless. And so I guess I'm always looking to learn something new or move on to something new. That doesn't mean to say I don't like finishing things, but I do like learning things. So my first job was in advertising sales with a regional newspaper called the Hemel Hempstead Post Echo, which doesn't exist anymore. So it was a graduate scheme, and I didn't actually want to get into advertising sales at all, but I took the job because I couldn't get a job in advertising. I wanted to work in advertising agencies. That was my mission. But I couldn't initially get a job in advertising. So I thought, okay, well, I'll do a stepping stone thing. I definitely need to get a job. Let's get a job in something that's related. So I worked in classified sales, display sales, learned how to do cold calling. And back then, the Hemel Hempstead Post Echo was part of Thomson Regional Newspapers, and Thomson Regional Newspapers had a reputation for training good salespeople and also training good journalists. So it was really thorough sales training. So the thing I got out of that more than anything else was knowing how to sell. And in fact, one of the things I find really interesting these days is that lots of organizations don't seem to invest as much money into training people to sell as one might expect. So I hated the job though, absolutely hated it. when you're sitting on a telephone, and they used to do these holiday supplements in the newspaper to kind of generate extra cash. So they give you a guidebook from Devon, say. So imagine we're in Hertfordshire. In Devon, they say, right, we're going to do a holiday supplement. So here's a guidebook for Devon. Phone up every single hotel in Devon and ask them if they want to do an ad in our holiday supplement. So this is like cold calling, horrible cold calling. And you just think, why would anyone ever buy one of these dreadful ads? But they did. But what it really taught me more than anything else is, someone was making you make these calls, so you couldn't not do it. But actually it taught you resilience, because you were phoning up these people out of the blue, doing your pitch, refining your sales pitch, and actually winning business remarkably. I look back on it and I think, I don't know how I managed to actually win business. So from that side of things, it was good learning to sell. It was horrible though as a job. It was a business that was in decline, very negative. It was in Hemel Hempstead. I didn't really like Hemel Hempstead very much. I wanted to be in London, so I lasted a year, but it taught me a lot. And I think this is one of the things I've learned, back to my sort of what have I learned about my career, is that even the worst job will teach you something good. Even if it's like, I don't want to do that anymore. But certainly the Hemel Hempstead Post Echo job taught me how to sell, and I've used it over and over again. And I think even if you're not...
So that builds you a really thick skin, Julia, just listening into that, from the horror stories of others. I don't know whether it's the culture of standing on a desk till you made a sale, ring a bell, all those kind of stories, almost Glenn Ross style. But just to take that point just for a second, of now back to today, that thick skin of actually somebody's got to sell. It may not be something we want to do. If you're starting a business, anyone listening in, is you may be a subject matter expert, and I see this quite often with technology companies, startups that have got a brilliant product and a brilliant idea, but forget the fact they need to do those hard yards and have that almost rhino skin to, we just got to keep knocking the door until somebody answers.
Yes.
Sounds like there's been real learning from there to carry through the whole time.
Yeah, no, you're right. And certainly I'm using some of that with the data protection network. So at the point when you think, oh, should I really chase them again? I've already emailed them once. The answer is yes, you should definitely chase them again, because you don't need to be rude or anything like that. But, if you put yourself in the shoes of your prospect, the prospect's probably busy doing 1,000 other things and may have forgotten about it. And certainly I've sent emails to people and said, oh, just checking in, just seeing how you are, blah, blah. And it just jogs their memory. So it's very important to keep on. I think selling now certainly isn't like Glengarry Glen Ross anymore. Certainly not like that regional newspaper. I'd never like to sell like that again. But the fact is, keeping going and not giving up is important. And not feeling worried about what people might think about you is also important, because if you do your job professionally, they'll recognize that you're doing your job professionally. The people who just keep on hammering away saying the same things and are behaving in a somewhat tone-deaf way are the ones that are annoying. So I think selling properly and listening to what your prospects are saying is key. Lots of people don't listen. And I think, the training will tell you, listen carefully and then respond to what they say.
I think that's sort of really interesting for all of us, and sort of reflecting on that. And just, we're all so busy and people have got different challenges. It's not because they don't want to engage it, as you pointed out. It's just there's so much going on, and that resilience that you talk about, I think, is really interesting, because I think you mentioned, that got you through a job you didn't really, enjoy necessarily. But did it get you the next job that you wanted, and did it get you into advertising?
Well, sort of yes and no. I mean, one of the other lessons I've learned about jobs and getting jobs is that probably the majority of the jobs I have got have been through networking. And actually what happened with that job, with the job I got next, was that it was the friend of a friend who worked in a media agency, an advertising agency in central London, who had a vacancy in their media department, and then they introduced me to them. So it's that letting people know what you want is important. Lots of people don't do that because they think, oh, I don't know. Letting people know what you want, and then when something pops up, they'll remember you. And in fact, that's exactly what happened to me. If I look back on it now, it was a classic piece of networking, even though at the time I didn't really see it like that, because I was just out at the pub one night with a friend of mine whose friend worked in advertising, and that was it. So that's how the second job came along. And then after that, and that was in Covent Garden. And after that, then I moved into London, and then I had two more agency jobs after that before I moved on to doing my master's degree.
Pubs. You mentioned pubs. I remember those. Those are places that we used to all do business many, many months ago. I mean, there's a real learning there, isn't it? That networking. And actually, Shane, you and Julia, both very, very good examples of this, of maintaining a network, because you just never know, Julia, who might be in a pub or on a webinar or on a podcast, or dare I say listening to a podcast, that might go, oh, actually that person. It's all about, continually, not for vacuous reasons of collecting followers, which often I think people think of networking, but it is that build a network of trusted people and pay it forward, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, so I can think of nothing worse than going to a drinks reception or networking event and walking up to people and starting talking. I find that very difficult.
Thrusting a business card in their hand.
Absolutely.
That kind of networking, I think people fear, don't they?
Yes, really find that hard. But, I am naturally, I like people around me. I like engaging with people. That's just my personality. And so actually, having a network of friends and colleagues and contacts is something I find relatively easy to... Sorry, that was my
Well,
phone.
if you're going to talk about friends, they're likely to phone you, Julia, at that point. That's the perfect time for a phone call when we're doing a networking podcast. Do carry on.
Together. It was on silent. And now
No, I think you did that on purpose to prove just how strong your network is. That's the listeners will applaud that.
But I think a lot of people don't necessarily find it that easy. I mean, in the end, I just like hanging out with people. And so going to the pub and things like that is something that I quite like doing, but not everyone would like doing that. And I think you just take, the business networking can just be having a conversation with one person over a cup of coffee. It does not need to be going to the painful networking events. And you build them up over time. If I think about some of the people I know, and I mean, Shane is a perfect example of that. It's like Shane and I have known each other for 25 years, I think we calculated the other day. So it's just friendships and, people you like spending time with as much as anything else.
I think that's an interesting point about, you don't necessarily have to enjoy all aspects of something. Like you mentioned, the worst nightmare being at a party or whereas that would be my happy place, as most people who know me well, is like, I love parties, I love meeting people, I'm very happy to go up to people. But I think it's that reflection of actually perhaps the way the world has changed. I certainly, when we met, kept business and work very separate. And I think that's to be one of the biggest changes even this year, is that, the opening up of, Zoom into our homes, is those barriers have gone. And do you think that makes networking easier now, Julia, or is it all a bit blurred and muddled? I mean, it's easy for us because, we've built our network over our careers, but somebody starting out now, you can't go to the pub and you can't have a coffee. So what are you seeing that people are doing instead?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think networking now for people who don't are not as old as us is actually quite difficult, because there's a real danger, I think, in your Zoom land that you become very isolated, because in fact, it is passing meetings as well, or meeting people through a different kind of contact that can develop these relationships. So, I mean, I think you see lots of Zoom calls or Zoom meetings or socials or all of those kind of things. But fundamentally, we've got into this groove of there's many webinars. Well, even with webinars, all you're doing is a kind of point-to-point conversation or posting your question in the chat room. So it's not easy. And again, I think we're in a very privileged position in that, we know quite a lot of people, we're in a nice, comfortable home. There are lots of people who are trying to do their jobs from their living room or their relatively small flat. And I think that causes all sorts of difficulties in terms of, mental health and their ability to kind of create some boundaries between their work life and their home life.
So any tips for those who perhaps are in that situation? Is there anything that you've seen, perhaps people haven't got a network, trying to build it, do well?
So it's sort of in the lockdown situation?
Yeah.
Well, so interestingly, so one of the things that I have as a task whilst I've been in lockdown is looking after my daughter's rather large dog. And what's good about having a dog, and you can borrow someone's dog as well. My neighbour borrowed our dog every day during lockdown, is that you go to the park and you meet people in the park, and you can do it in a socially distanced way and not break any of the rules. And in fact, I've created quite a big network in the park with people who all bring their dogs out in the morning, and then you just start chatting. And I think that's a really good way of just breaking away from your laptop and your desk and your table, whilst also getting some much needed exercise. Because I think the other problem or the other danger is that you can sit at home all day long, literally, I don't know, walk 500 steps or something, and not feel particularly good at the end of the day, actually feel quite jaded. Whereas if you do take the dog out for a walk, and in this lockdown, I'm deliberately taking the dog out at lunchtime for an hour or two, and then you come back during the rest of the day and think, okay, I feel good now because I've been for my exercise, I've met a couple of people, I've had a bit of a chat, and now I can come home and settle down to doing some work.
I think it's, by the way, borrowmydoggy.com. It literally plays to that. If people are listening going, do I have to buy a dog to be able to play this game? You could. And it's not about dog, is it? It's as much as about you, Julia, of just giving yourself the chance to get out, to meet people. But also, I think what a lot of people have learned, there we are, just as we demonstrated. We've almost prompted you, like the BBC Radiophonics department, Julia. We wanted you to make receive a phone call when we talk networking and a dog to bark when we talk dogs. Well, we will test you with other sounds as we go. Is that actually people have changed their working patterns, where And I've had the luxury of working from home quite a lot over the last 5 or 6 years, although we have an office. So I'm quite used to it and I'm set up for it. But even now, I still struggle to think, am I allowed to go out at 11 o'clock in the morning? I'd normally feel I should be on a call or in a meeting. So people have just had to learn to adapt their working practices. And because a lot of people are doing it, there are a lot more people out on the streets that, whether they're with dog or not, that you might just strike up a friendship or a conversation with. And
Yeah,
you know where it might lead.
I agree. I think you have to create boundaries and you have to kind of delineate the day a bit, which is why this time round I've gone for the couple of hours off at lunchtime piece, not least because it gets dark at like 5 o'clock, whereas in the, before I used to go out in the evening. So I think you do need to carve out that time and not feel guilty about it. I mean, it is the freelancer's curse, to be honest, not ever wanting to stop working because you're worried that, well, I might not have any work next week, or so actually creating that discipline is important. And I think for people like us, because I've been freelancing for the last 4 years, then it's easier than it is for individuals who have had a very structured life, going into the office, meeting with their friends and their colleagues, doing their work, coming home again. And I think for them, where you're having to make a fairly major transition in very short order, I think there's been some greater difficulties. Actually, I have a client who has a 1-bedroom flat, and she says she literally sees nobody. She's just working from her kitchen all the time. And I think that can cause real challenges, actually.
That point about, the freedom of running your own company, freelancing, gig economy, whatever it is, I think that we are very fortunate. Those of us have done it, I've done it for a very long time. It's something you get used to, and it's very easy to forget how different it is in an enterprise environment. And in fact, Ruth Connor, who was a previous guest on the What We've Learned podcast, I really admire her because she, for her team, has said, what we're going to do is have walking meetings. We'll all we won't be on Zoom, we will, but we'll do it just via our mobiles without the cameras on. And we will walk and talk in the daylight. And actually, if anybody else wants to take a break during the day and would rather work when it's dark. And I think that leadership is really important. We're recognising that you need to change and make it work for everybody. And I know you, Julia, have had an amazing also enterprise career and had lots of commercial skills and, worked for some very big companies. And you must probably reflect that would be a very different place to be rather than doing what you're doing now. But you also mentioned that you did your MBA, London Business School. Is that what sort of really transformed your career and going into corporate? Was that the start of it?
Yes, it was. So I spent 7 years in advertising in 3 agencies and had the best time. This was in the late 80s when it was a good time to be working in advertising. My main challenge each morning was to figure out how many lunches I should have that week and where should I be going for lunch, because all the media owners just took all the media buyers out for lunch. So that was a good time. But in the end, actually, I got quite bored. And, once I worked on the Barclays account at my last agency, and once I'd done their media plan for the 3rd year, I thought, well, I'm not sure I really want to do this anymore. So I decided to do an MBA, and I did a full-time MBA, which meant I gave up work for 2 years and fully focused on it. And I think that was a good thing to do because I wanted to really figure out what I wanted to do with my career. I'd have to say nowadays, so that was 1990 to 92, I'm not sure people can afford to do that anymore. The fees are so high. I think if you look at LBS these days, the proportion of students are mostly international students, although that obviously may change, and people who are funded by their companies. So I think self-funded MBAs these days is a very rare thing. So anyway, yes, I decided to actually work in media. I liked media. I thought I want to work in a media company. And so after the MBA, which was sort of strategy and finance and operations and HR and all sorts of stuff, so I then went to work for IPC magazines, which then subsequently became Time Inc. And that was where I started off as a strategic planning manager for the CEO and then became their subscriptions director. And I guess that's the point where my love affair with subscriptions and direct marketing and data and customers and CRM started. So that's sort of 25 years ago. And that's obviously when you and I met, Shane. So data and customer data and databases has been a large part of my career for all of that time. And again, that was really a bit of an accident. It wasn't a plan. You know, I am quite numerate, but it wasn't something I thought, oh, I really want to get into databases. It was an opportunity that arose, and a bit of very good luck in that my CEO effectively offered me a job and gave me an opportunity, which, you know, I may not necessarily have been fully qualified for at that time, but he coached me into the role. So I have a lot to thank him for, because I think he really kick-started the corporate part of my career and gave me opportunities to really learn and thrive and grow.
I was going to ask actually where the seed of that data centricity came from, Julia, and you've just beaten me to it really with that answer. And it could easily flash us forward to the now and the future, which I want to come on to. But we met back in 2007 when you were at ITV, and what I was going to also ask you a bit about, not so much at ITV, but maybe, was you've obviously had that digital experience as well. Would you say that that's, you know, it's just added another string to your bow of understanding the digital landscape, and 13 years ago is quite a long time in terms of the maturity of digital. Was that luck? Was that well, actually, I've got data under my belt, digital's the next thing? How did that step come about?
So that wasn't luck, actually. I did decide that's what I wanted to do. So in fact, I left. So IPC it was just at the beginning of when websites were starting to be built, and IPC got quite a significant investment actually to build out their digital business. But at that point had decided that actually digital was completely separate to everything else. So I was looking after subscriptions and mail order and customer database and all sorts of other things. So in fact, they said to me, no, we don't want you to be involved with this digital stuff. You carry on doing what you're doing, and then we'll have a completely different place for digital, which felt all wrong to me. And so at that point, I decided it was time to move on. I had a year or two of freelancing, but then I went to work for a digital company, a company called ImageNet, which is still in existence and is now part of Getty Images. And ImageNet was a distribution company. It distributed images, publicity images for the movie business. So it was a website where images were uploaded in the US from all the big movie companies like Disney and Paramount. And then they were distributed via our service globally to 60 or 65 other territories. So we had a website that was based in that was UK centric. At the point I joined the company, they raised £5 million from a venture capitalist in order to expand the business. So we rebuilt the website, translated it into 17 languages, set up 6 offices, and I was looking after marketing and the whole kind of client care piece. So I had first-hand experience of working in a digital business from 2002 to 2006, at a point when, it was all pretty early days actually, and that helped enormously, because it meant I understood or learned very early on what it was like to work with developers and development teams, and how you kind of get an organization thinking about technology. But as the point you made earlier, Steve, is that the developers are often thinking about their solution, aren't necessarily always thinking about what the customer needs. So it was a very interesting and sometimes very difficult experience, but that's where my digital experience started. So it's nearly 20 years ago now. And you're right, that's a lot of experience relative to lots of other people. But certainly if you put digital plus data together, then that's quite a useful combination now.
So the digital, oh, sorry, Steve.
No,
so I'm
Shane,
going to say
go ahead.
Digital and data, but that is really now seems very obvious, and it's like, yes, it's a completely logical career path. But actually, for your next appointment, in terms of getting on the board, wasn't the classic background, was it? So what do you think was it that got you sort of your first board appointment?
So my first board appointment was actually via ITV. And in fact, for anyone who wants to become a NED, it's a good way to start. So in fact, I was appointed as a board director on Freeview, so an ITV appointed board director on Freeview, and also on the Thinkbox, which was the trade body for the TV business. And so what that meant was I was representing ITV on the board of Freeview, and it's a normal board. You're appointed as a normal board director. It gives you all of the useful experience you need around organising board meetings, being there, dealing with chairs, because boards can be quite formal places. So actually knowing, you know, the lingua franca, the way of working, how you interact with people, is quite important actually, because you can look like you don't really know what you're doing if you're not careful. So I was on both those boards for a year. And at the same time, I was appointed to the board of the DMA, the Direct Marketing Association. Now, of course, DMA is like, you know, home territory for me, and that was much, much easier. But again, unpaid, on the board of a trade body, again, gives you lots of experience around how to run board meetings, how to engage with your membership. And then it wasn't until, so those were in 2011, 2012, and then it was in 2016 I joined the board of Origin Housing, and that was my first grown-up board, I suppose, in that regulated sector, housing association, lots of governance, loads and loads of governance, really have to be very careful about funding, finance, scrutiny, transparency, all of those kind of things. So actually as a marketer, those are all things that weren't necessarily my strong suits when I started out, but you know, have gained a lot of experience in that space. And the reason why I joined that board and they wanted me was because of my CRM, digital, data experience. And no one else on that board has the same experience I've got. I'm unique on that board in that I know more about technology and customers and data and customer experience than all the rest of them, who are all housing professionals or finance professionals. So part of the trick is to figure out what you're good at and how you add diversity to a board and play those long suits, really play to those strengths rather than play them down. Now, as a marketer, you won't necessarily be the obvious candidate for lots of boards because, you know, boards like lots of accountants, they often take on HR professionals, they'll often take on lawyers. So as a marketer, you've got to really think quite carefully about how you add value over and above just being a marketer. And that's where the data and the digital bit came in.
It's really interesting. I guess it also, Julia, reflects slightly that board or the management of the chairing or the management of that board, that they recognise that that's a skill set that they should bring in at that level as well. So some boards will just pick what they know, accountancy and very kind of information-based leadership, whereas some boards are progressive enough, and perhaps we'll see more of this, that they realise not just the skills you've articulated, but that broader commercial marketing and sales hat is a jolly good thing to have for not just commercial boards, but for not-for-profits and for all sorts of other places where it's going to be a real helping hand.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, I think that we've got a long way to go to make you know, recruitment to boards as more open and transparent. But certainly, all the boards I sit on, my contribution is very much around, you know, the commercial side of the business. So I sit on, I'm trustee of a charity. I chair their fundraising committee, and that is all about helping them to understand how they're going to raise money more efficiently, and actually to not be embarrassed about fundraising. What's interesting about charities is they go, well, you know, it's a bit of the grubby end of the pipeline. It's like, well, it's not. Because if you don't raise money, you're not going to be able to give grants away. So, and part of it is to sort of, you know, encourage people not to be embarrassed about fundraising. And then I also sit on the board of a replacement windows company called Safe Style. And again, you know, there's only 3 Neds on our board, but of the 3 of us, I'm the only commercial one. The other 2 are very strong on finance. And so actually I can see I add value because I have done something different to them in the past. So, you know, it's creating balance in the team.
You make it sound very easy, Julia, to have this amazing portfolio of non-execs, start your own business. But actually, and I know, and I can say this because I do know you well, I know how hard you've worked at building your own brand and invested in learning new skills and training yourself. And, you know, when you decided to set out to be a non-exec, you know, the effort that you put in to get those skills. But I'm also interested to know, have you ever hit a glass ceiling?
Yes, I think, yeah. Yes, there is at least one job I did not get because I was a woman. And the trouble is, there's a friend of mine wrote a book called The Glass Wall, actually, which is well worth a read. And it talks about how it may not be overt, but actually there is this sort of theme of low-level everyday sexism, which is really hard to put your finger on, but it exists. And so having the confidence to either call it out or to not pay attention is quite important. You know, I'm sure you've sat through this, Shane, where you're in a meeting, you're talking about a topic, I make a point, no one pays attention, my male colleague makes the same point, and somehow that's a brilliant idea. And you go, hang on a minute, I just said that. So there's all of those kind of issues. But I think, you know, today, women, I'm not a particularly shrill feminist. I think you just need to kind of make your points clearly and calmly and coach people into being kind of strong leaders. I loved Kamala Harris's speech the other day when she was talking about, I mean, I won't be the only woman who does this role. And she was talking about, you know, there's lots of little girls out there who will see her as a role model. I thought that was fantastic. You know, to see a woman like that actually finally getting to that leadership role and then recognizing how important it was as well.
It's an interesting listen, isn't it? Because back to your point around boards, there's still a long way to go with boards recognising marketing and commercial skills. Is it the same here, do you think, Julia, that whatever level of business, it's still a long way effectively for men to give way and accept it's okay, you know, to not have this domination? Or is it a generational thing? Do you think there's an element of younger, smaller businesses don't have that legacy? Any take on that?
Well, so I think it's not just women as well. I mean, we're talking about diversity in the context of women, but actually talking about BAME candidates as well. Frankly, it's even worse. The fact that Kamala Harris is a woman and BAME is really interesting, actually. I find in some tech businesses that the issues around, you know, how masculine that working environment is can be quite challenging. And I think there's been plenty of stories about what happened in some of the big tech companies in the US, which raises a few alarm bells, actually. And in some respects, I think, you know, we are going backwards. So I definitely don't think we're always heading in the right direction. I think there's a few other things going on. You know, board roles to a large extent. There's still an element of networking. It's like who you know. And I think you're seeing a lot of that who you know stuff going on in government at the moment. So I think that's an issue. So are jobs being advertised openly and transparently? Not always. So companies that have to, which are largely charities and housing associations and government appointments, yes. But if you look at you know, commercial companies, then there's an awful lot going on in the background. You never necessarily find out about these jobs. So I think it's you know, making it acceptable that actually there should be a fair and level playing field for applicants is important. And
it sort of brings us back to the first point, Julia, that you made about recognising the importance of balanced teams in the data protection network, and the fact that your associates, you all had very different skills. And to me, it's the same in the board, is that, you know, one-dimensional boards are not healthy and they're not good. And I completely agree with you that often it's the small, fast growth tech that are the least diverse, and actually that's often compounded by the backing and the finance teams that support them. And so I think, you know, it is a challenge, I think, for our industry and for all of us to think and reflect about how do we change that and how do we help each other. So I think, yeah, lots to think about there.
It's an interesting, slightly different angle as well. There's a great book by a guy called Dan Lyons called Disrupted from about 3 years ago, where he was a 50-year-old employee at HubSpot, the marketing automation company. So a unicorn style business that we're talking about, and just how he found it really difficult being at least double the age of everybody else, and that prejudice towards age, which sounds incredibly short-sighted, but very possible in lots of companies. It's not about his age, it's his vast experience that he brings in, and really sad that still is part of this landscape.
Oh, I mean, the not invented here syndrome is alive and well. I mean, that I think is all over the place. Is people come in, think that they're the first person to have thought of something, don't necessarily want to find out what the experience has been elsewhere, and then you're constantly reinventing the wheel. I find it frustrating beyond belief, and I think, you know, ageism is part of it, but there is just generally a sentiment, and it can be people the same age as well. It's like, finding it hard to listen to what everyone else has already learned. If there was, one of your questions, like what advice would you give people, is go and find out what they've done already. Try and figure out how to make the thing that's happening better rather than just reinventing it. Listening just feels like an underrated skill, actually, because you find out so many things and it gets you to a solution far quicker than if you just try to figure it all out from first principles.
Lovely advice. So we've had resilience, networking, the power of listening. Any final tip for everybody listening that through your career and to be doing what you're doing today, that for people listening in, that perhaps they should reflect on, that you've learnt, Julia?
I think my final thought is that you're never too old to learn something new, and that combined with don't be afraid to ask the dumb questions, because sometimes you might think, well, maybe I don't understand this thing because I'm too old, or I'm a bit out of touch, or whatever it is. The chances are you're not. So just ask those dumb questions, and what you'll often see is people around the table going, yeah, no, I wanted to ask that as well, but I was afraid to. So I think it's like, just go for it.
I love that. And it's not even a question of age, because I think that hopefully that the profile of our listeners is not all biased towards the older demographic, but it's that confidence. You mentioned that confidence of asking, as you say, sometimes what you might think is a dumb question. It's never a dumb question. And I see some fabulous now, like Steve moderating virtual conferences, like you saying, Julia, you do lots of webinars. Seeing the questions come in from chat is one of, to me, the biggest brilliant things about the new world of conferences, because everybody gets a chance to participate, and particularly personas that perhaps wouldn't stick up a hand in a meeting room will jump onto chat, and the contribution and the learnings are huge. So I completely agree with you. We can all carry on learning.
We definitely can. We definitely can. Julia, look, thanks ever so much for your time. We'll call a halt there, because we know you've got so many plates to spin, including dog walking probably, as we come up to that point of the day. So thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure. I've enjoyed it.
Well, what a treat. Always lots to learn, and it's always just such a pleasure. We could have chatted for ages to Julia, but some really key takeaways, hopefully for everybody. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, absolutely agree, Shane. I think the challenge with Julia is we didn't have enough tape to be able to carry on recording for as long as we possibly could. I will but just pick up a couple of points, Shane, just for our listeners, for their own sanity's sake, and to remind them of their youthfulness. We aren't quite yet hospital radio in terms of our demographic. We're not sponsored by Saga. We do have a really healthy mix, and if you go and have a look actually at wwlpodcast.co.uk, which takes you to our LinkedIn page, we'll post out the demographics from season 1. And indeed, Shane, as you may remember, what other people listen to when they're not listening to us, which is Dua Lipa and other youthful, cool artists and bands. So a real spectrum of people that will have enjoyed that today, is guess what I'm saying.
Yeah, very cool audience, definitely. And I think, the thing for me is that, meeting Julia fairly early on in my career, is that the things that seem very obvious now and reflecting and looking back aren't always reflecting and obvious when you start. So I think, I think there's so much we can all learn from each other, and that networking point is so important, even if it doesn't come naturally, because people do want to help each other. And I think what's been lovely about doing the What We've Learnt podcast is people have reached out through this and joined the conversation on LinkedIn and actually tried to help each other. There's been some really good post podcast networking as a result.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting actually hearing, it means even more actually hearing from someone like Julia, dare I say it, because for those, the casual listener may not know that Shane actually was awarded the LinkedIn Before LinkedIn Existed award a few years ago, weren't you, Shane, at a very prestigious ceremony.
I'm very proud of that one.
Yeah, I know you still have that statuette in your house that pride of place. But yeah, you are, and as you just described, you're very comfortable in a room. And I think Julia probably embodies a lot of people that are more that omnivert, perhaps not introverted, not extroverted, but somewhere in the middle, that find that thing quite intimidating. And she really proves the point in terms of pushing yourself out of your comfort zone is hard, but possible to do, and do in fairly manageable ways. You know, that one-to-one networking. It doesn't have to be quantity of people you meet. It's the quality. And that company she's kept, Shane, as well. We didn't even have time to talk about the fact that Julia chaired the Direct Marketing Association for a number of years, and she's achieved so much that's really inspiring, regardless of your background, gender, age, ethnicity, as we talked about. She really has built her own brand, and in a healthy way, rather than a kind of 2020 vacuous social media way that we perhaps associate with brand building or personal brand.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that sort of point about brand building is a really good one to sort of reflect on. And it's about investing in yourself and investing in training, and knowing that if you don't have certain skills, and it doesn't mean you, as Julia said, you don't mean you have to like doing them, but if you understand the importance and you learn how to do them, sometimes things that can seem difficult, hard, challenging. I mean, my first one was learning to do public speaking, and I hated every minute of it. And I just, because I was put on a stage in front of people, had no training, and that was my first ever experience. It absolutely bombed.
It's almost most people's nightmares.
It was a nightmare. It was a nightmare come true. Yeah, and it was because my boss got a sore throat and 10 minutes beforehand said, I can't do this. And I think that, you know, facing your demons almost, which is, I think, was sort of as the subtext of what Julia was saying, is that, you know, if there's things that perhaps are challenging. So I went and trained myself on how to become, you know, a speaker, and I can always do better and I'm always learning, but actually found I quite enjoyed it once I knew what I was supposed to be doing. And I think that's the same thing for all of us. And that for me is a huge takeout, is, you know, perhaps challenge yourself a bit more, and things that seem scary, you know, learn how to do them.
Yeah, well, I think just even a slightly simpler version of that from my engagements with Julia back at ITV, which is when I first met her, is being brave. And she was in that digital role, and it's worth remembering in 2020 that 13 years ago was a long time ago when it comes to things like digital and social media. And what she'd recognized, I think, is she needed to be, or ITV needed to be, brave with embracing. It wasn't even called social media back then, Shane. It was social networking. And my task, alongside great guy Nick Emmel, who was at Dare and I think is now at Mr. President, was to try and educate their brand and marketing and PR teams on social networks. And at the time, YouTube and Facebook, which were just emerging, and the potential value. And that was very much pushing on a closed door. But Julia was brave enough to say, look, we need to do things differently. And dare I say it, sounds funny for me to say it, but she recognized she couldn't do on her own, is to find, through that network that she's got, and she talked about, find people that can help her, that have got like-minded or shared skills, almost like her board synthesis that she talked about again, is, well, she knows this is a problem, but she makes skills for it. How do I bring in people that can help me be brave and turn the corner, as she so successfully did there, and onwards with The Guardian and all sorts of places that she's been into.
I think that's a really interesting point to us to pick up and actually think and ask our listeners, you know, where are the challenges that they're facing now? Where are they having to be brave? What's the new digital barrier? You know, what are the people facing now that perhaps isn't obvious to everybody else in their organisation? So I think that would be good to hear, because then we could find a really good guest to really explore that one.
Another really good guest. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great way to end, is to say, look, I hope you've enjoyed today and found Julia's insight and experience useful to you. But to Shane's probe, well, what are you struggling with? Come and let us know. You can go on to wwlpodcast.co.uk. As I said, it routes through to our LinkedIn home. Go and add a post into this particular episode when you hear it, and let us know. Is it one word answer of this is what you're struggling with? Maybe you've solved it, or maybe you know someone that solved it, and we'd happily like to hear their story or yours, or it may inspire us to go and find somebody else that might solve that problem for us all. So, as ever, thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much, Shane, to you, and most importantly, thank you to Julia Porter. We will see you again soon.